Today with me, I have an old colleague of mine and a tech design buddy. So we'll be chatting about technical design, what it is, and answering any questions that you might have about it. So welcome, Leo Simkin. Hello.
Hello. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. How are you doing?
Yeah, pretty good. Pretty good. Having a serious think about tech design in preparation. So, despite being a technical designer, not something I think about too often. So this is a good exercise.
Yes,
Uh,
I'm so excited for this one because we were talking about this just now, but Leo and I worked together for 2-ish years, maybe around that.
Something like
Yeah,
that.
but we didn't work like closely. We were always working on completely different systems with completely different teams. So I think it'll be a really interesting discussion on like how we both view tech design and what it is, yeah, and how we do it.
Yeah. I think it's going to be interesting how different our experiences might have been, despite working at the same company in the same department. So.
Yeah, exactly. But a little bit about you. So, if you could just introduce yourself, who are you?
Yeah, it's me, Leo Simkin, a senior technical designer working at Creative Assembly. Yeah, I've been working in games for the last 9 years. I started as an engineer and then transitioned into technical design. Yeah, so it's been a little bit of a journey. I'm from the States. So I was working in California when I started, and now I'm here in sunny England. Um,
Yeah, welcome.
yeah, but no, I'm enjoying it so far. So yeah.
That's good. And have you worked on any games or with any studio that you might want to like share with us?
Um, Well, a lot of the games in recent history that I worked on got canceled, unfortunately. But which is like that's just the nature of game development. But the first company I worked for, Blind Squirrel Games, was like a work for hire company. So got to work on a lot of pretty high profile games and mostly like ports and remasters and that kind of stuff. But I think in terms of like projects that I most was excited about or really proud of was got to work on Civilization 6 briefly,
Nice.
which I was really jazzed about because I'm a big Civ fan. So similarly, got to work on the console port for The Sims 4. I
Ah.
also love playing The Sims, so that was a dream come true. If for no other reason than they sponsored a bunch of expansion packs, and those are expensive. But yeah, I worked on the Bioshock remasters, on
Very
the
nice.
console version of XCOM 2. Um, I feel like some other things, but I think those are like
Damn.
the big ones.
I did not know you'd worked on that many. I guess that's what happens when you work for like an outsourcing studio versus working in a studio that's working on their own like IP or something.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, to be honest, when I started, it was kind of grating on my ego because I think like most bright-eyed, bushy-tailed people just getting into the industry, they want to make like the next big thing, and have like the greatest new title. But in retrospect, I'm really grateful for the experience, honestly, because it exposed me to lots of different teams, lots of different tools, lots of different like work methodologies, and I think that really helped me, um, get better at game development overall.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing to note as well, because the main reason why I wanted to ask this question is because it is one of the first questions that you get asked anyone working in the games industry, and I always find the answer is so similar. It's like, either it's like nothing you've heard of, or it's like actually I've been working on the same game for like 10 years.
yeah,
So yeah, it's just something that happens a lot. But I don't think I've ever asked you this before. What made you want to pursue a career in game development?
I've always been into um, making experiences like for people. Even prior to when I started working in the games industry professionally, I was making my own little games, like as a kid in Basic, and then later um, in trying to make my own like little Unity projects. And I've made like tons of really crappy board games. Um, and I loved writing D&D modules, and it was all just like I don't know. I love presenting something to people and having them interact with it and getting joy out of it. So I think in that sense, I was really always attracted to the idea of games.
Yeah.
And after my parents made what I'm sure they consider a major mistake of buying me a Game Boy and then a PlayStation, I like they couldn't tear me away from the damn thing. So I think it was just like a natural progress or natural like convergence of appetites. So yeah, that's how I ended up toward games.
Nice. But yeah, you're just an overall very creative being, so it does make sense why you've made it into this career. And it's really good because I also feel like sometimes like technical design, it doesn't seem as creative as maybe other avenues in the games industry, but I think actually to be a technical designer, thinking creatively is a skill that is needed because there's always like a million different ways that you can do something. So you have to be a very creative person to be able to see all these different avenues and then explore them kind of even just visually in your brain before you spend time figuring out the solution. So yeah, creativity is also a technical thing as well, not just a pretty artsy thing. Although,
Absolutely.
okay. Next question. So, how did you develop the skills that you need to develop games? I mean, it sounds like you already had the creativity, something that was just innate in you, but how did you actually develop, I guess, the more technical skills to make the games?
Looking back, it feels like there was a lot of lucky circumstances that like kind of came to it. Because like as I described, like I was just happened to be really into games, and when you're into something, you want to like research it and think about it critically and all
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. So I guess if I were to reframe the question into kind of like what might a planned path have been if I had planned it instead of just going with the flow, um, I think a big component of developing the skills is being curious and thinking critically about what you're consuming. Um, I play probably an unhealthy amount of games, and I play games, and I highly recommend other people do too, in genres that they normally wouldn't gravitate toward, and um, really think about what's like gelling with you, what's not, and think about why that is, why something feels good to play, or why something is fun, and why is something annoying you right now, or why not. And that's a good way to develop design skills.
Yeah.
In terms of technical skills, um, so I went to university. Um, I I actually went to university thinking I'd be either like a physicist or an engineer. I went
Right.
into the physics program. While I really enjoy knowing about physics, I really don't enjoy doing any physics. So then I did a complete 180. I joined the art program at my university, um, but I found that to be like there wasn't like a grounding in any technique. And I think especially because I came from the like art school experience, I wanted to be like, okay, how do I become a better artist? And the program was very much like, think about how this thing impacts your perception of society.
Yeah.
Eventually, I settled on something in the middle, which was a computer science. So,
Gotcha.
um, I got I have a computer science degree from the University of California, Santa Barbara. Although that program wasn't really game focused at all. I think the closest game thing we had was like one graphics class.
Got you.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I had an education in game development by any means, but in a lot of the adjacent skills. And I think having that computer science education really helped um, structure the thinking. You know what I mean? And thinking about architecture. And I think that especially is something really important
Yeah.
in tech design in
Yeah.
particular.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, yeah, I guess. So you went into uni doing like one thing and then went to do another, to do art, and so that's really interesting. And so you basically, was that all in your first year? You were just like, oh, not sure about this course. I want to try this one instead. And you just kind of like bounced around until you found, or did you have to start from a clean slate? Because a lot of people think that once you go into uni, right, you're trapped. You've chosen this
Oh,
now. You have to stay there until the end. So how did you manage that?
yeah. Well, one thing I should mention is that I went to university in the States.
Yeah.
So I don't know how, if at all, different it is in the UK. So I can't comment on that difference anyway. Um, Additionally, I was fortunate enough that I could afford a little bit of extra time. So I graduated in 5 years instead of the normal uh,
Oh,
4.
okay.
Um, so yeah, I think basically the first 1.5 years I spent trying to figure it out
Mm.
of like what I wanted. That's when I did the physics program and switched to the art program. And all the while, like at least at my university, you're still required to take kind of like general education courses. Like you can't graduate unless you've taken a writing course or whatever.
Oh,
So you can still
really?
do that
Oh, interesting.
um,
Okay.
mid your specialization.
Mm.
So at least I knocked out all those general things, and then I could focus just completely on computer science when I finally dedicated myself to that.
Yeah, nice.
Um,
I wish unis did that in general because I only ask how you did it because I did the same thing. I went to uni to do a film course, but it was supposed to be
right.
like a technical film course. So it was creating films in game engines. Well, that's what I was told it was. And then when I got there, they were like, "Oh, actually, we've completely changed it. We're not using
Uh,
game engines." And I was like, "That's why I'm here." But I didn't realize until I was there and then I started looking into it that you could actually change your uni course, like if it wasn't what you expected, or you didn't feel like it's actually gonna help you in some way. So I think it's important to let other people know that this is possible and people do it all the time.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
because
I
three
think
years
there's a
is a
lot of
long time. Okay, let's chat about tech design. Why we're
let's do it.
here. So, in your own words, explain what is a technical designer.
That's like the $1 million question, isn't it? I feel like every company I've interviewed with ever has a slightly different idea of what a technical designer is, and I feel like I've done most of them. um, I think the slogan that is kind of coming together, coalescing around tech designer is that like tech designers are the bridge between design and engineering. I'm sure you've heard that many times as well at Creative Assembly and other places.
Yeah.
Um, but that still doesn't really describe what a technical designer does
Mm.
or what they're responsible for. Um, I've seen it in ways that like technical designer is just a designer who also has technical skills, and they are responsible for the design and implementation of some stuff, usually at kind of like a rough or prototype stage before handing it off to engineers. That was
Yeah.
my first tech design experience, actually, when I just became a tech designer. Um, and there is something on the totally opposite end of the spectrum, which is technical designers are basically like the standard coding standards police, um, where they're in the role of a technical designer is to enforce stability and adherence to proper scripting standards and how the game is built and that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's not really my jam. Um, I definitely skew toward the previous one, but I
Yeah.
think ultimately the role of a technical designer to um, is to support the design efforts of the team with a uh, like technical and structured framework, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. It does.
Is that consistent with your experience as a technical designer?
Yeah, yeah, it is. I mean, I often default to the bridge between programming and design because it's so much easier to say that than to say what you've just said, which is like what you've said is much more all encompassing and clear. But it's like, it's a lot and it is different from studio to studio. What I've kind of my experience in like talking to other people in tech design as well, and even working with different tech designers, it's like some people are more tools focused and other people are more like prototype focused. I think that's why it was nice anyway at like CA working with you. And everyone else, because it's kind of like we all had our own thing of what
Yeah.
we like to, some of us really did like to hone in on the blueprints, best practices, and like, okay, everyone should be using these naming conventions and stuff, and other people were just like, I don't really care about that, but like I've got this system and
Yeah.
I'm owning it and I'm like creating this whole like framework that's going to make it so much easier for all of the like designers and the level designers, and that was their jam. So yeah, no, I think what you said is completely right. And support is the main word there. It's like we are the
Yeah.
support team. That's basically it. And
It totally is.
yeah.
Yeah.
Now you tell me, in your opinion, what is the difference between a designer, a programmer, and a tech designer? Because this is a question that gets asked a lot.
Sure. Yeah. So I think it's best to kind of break it down by responsibilities. We kind of already talked about tech design, um, but a designer is responsible for making the game fun. That's their like primary goal. Everything that they do should be in the service of making something fun. And fun is like a really obviously all encompassing term that includes like making it pleasant to run around, to use doors, or to um, or how to keep people engaged in the game. So like fun's a really big thing, but that's basically the responsibility of the designers. The responsibility of programmers or engineers um, is to make things work, and not only work but also be performant. That's again, that work is a really big kind of all-encompassing thing, because not only are they enacting the the implementing the systems and stuff that the designers have uh, invented, um, but they also have to make sure that uh, the hardware can support this, that the game isn't going to lag and suddenly become unfun because too many things are being loaded all at once. So there's a lot of considerations, and programming and engineering has like many disciplines and specializations under it. From like gameplay programming to engine programming, and those are all very like wide knowledge bases, but they all basically are kind of, I don't want to say in the service because it sounds like very hierarchical, but for lack of a better word, in the service of the design. Um, and tech design, as we said, is somewhere in the middle. It's kind of facilitating the communication between those two disciplines. Um, the role of the technical designer is to hear out the designs and understand them, and translate that into um, a, a plan for the technology, or an interface to
Yeah.
the technology that the programmers would then build. So
Yeah, yeah, and that's
that's how I
why.
would classify it.
Yeah, yeah, no, exactly, and that's why it's quite important that tech designers, even if they're not programmers, at least know how to talk to programmers. Know what language to use. Yeah,
Yeah.
and how did you become a technical designer? So this isn't really about like how you got into the games industry. Did you want to become a technical designer? Did you fall into the role? How did you become one?
Sure. Yeah. It was a little bit by accident or opportunistic. I really wanted to be a designer.
Right.
Um, uh, but on accident, I got a computer science degree instead, so I became an engineer. Um, on accident. Um, so yeah, I got into the games industry as a gameplay engineer. And like I said, working for a work for hire company, um, that gave me lots of opportunities to do not only gameplay but like other things like UI and um, cert compliance and multiplayer things and a bunch of stuff. Um, but uh, I I was have always been more attracted to the question of like what makes something fun rather than what makes something work or what makes something performant. Um, and that's why, and you can see that from like my history even prior to that, and like wanting to make games and experiences. Um, so at some point when I was ready to leave that company and I was interviewing at another place at Exxon, um, that studio had two games going at once, and I went to the interview as an engineer, um, totally just expecting to just be another engineer on the project. Um, but when I was interviewing, it was interviewing with both team or with people from both teams, with both creative directors. Um, and when I got the call back, they were like, "Hey, like we want you at our studio. We have two projects. Uh, you can go to this project and be an engineer, or um, if you're interested, you can go to this project as a technical designer. Because when we were talking, this is from the perspective of the creative director of the second project. When we were talking, it sounded like you had like a good design mind, or that you were interested in that kind of stuff. So would you be interested, alternatively, as being a technical designer on that?" And I was like, "Heck yeah, let's do that one." Because like I said, I wanted to kind of drift toward design.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, long story short, I totally fell into it, or you know, took the opportunity when I found it, but I wasn't really I didn't have a plan
Yeah.
to do that.
Did you even know it
But
was a
I kind of
thing?
lucked out. Sorry.
Did you know it was a thing? Did you know tech designers
Um,
existed?
Not really,
Yeah.
because we didn't have any tech designers at my first professional job, and that's all the experience I had with the industry. Um, and when I heard technical designer, I totally thought it was like a designer who also gets to implement things, which is what I wanted to do, because I genuinely like doing both.
Yeah, that is the good thing about being a tech designer. Get best of both worlds, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this might catch you off guard. I did give you the questions before, but what are some mistakes that you made when you started out as a technical designer?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah.
Um,
Or like, what's some mistakes that like a junior technical designer might make more than a senior? Like if you look back at little Leo,
yeah. Oh, little Leo.
little Leo.
I don't know. I'm like 6'4", so little Leo's a long time ago. But I mean, I've definitely made uh, mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. Um, I think one of the easiest mistakes to fall into from a design perspective, excuse me, is overcommitting to any specific design. In the sense that uh, designs should be solving some sort of problem for your game, or answering some sort of question for your game. And it can be very easy, especially for people who are new to the profession, to really kind of like dig themselves into a rabbit hole with a solution. So like if there's a problem, you invent a solution, but it doesn't quite work, so you double down on it and create a solution to the solution that's actually causing a new problem. And then that doesn't quite work, so you create a solution to the solution to the solution, and you just keep getting deeper and deeper, and the thing like still isn't fun, or still doesn't quite work. And I've definitely been I've definitely had my share of those kind of things, and the real fix to that kind of thinking is um, you need to step back and think about the game kind of holistically. Oftentimes, simple things work better than very complicated specific things. I know I'm talking in generalizations because I can't remember the
Yeah, no, that's
specific
fine.
instance.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd say that's a pretty common mistake to make from a design standpoint is yeah, overcommitting
Yeah.
to a design.
Yeah. Yeah, I can totally see that. Yes, and I think as a technical designer, I sometimes still find myself like getting overwhelmed or like doubling down on like I have this way of setting up this thing and it should work. Why is it not working? And then I just spend like 3 hours like it should work. And then I know
Yeah.
I could just go on a walk, go away from the computer, and then I'll like something will go ping, and then I'm like, oh, yeah, of
Yeah.
course, you know, a solution will pop up, and yeah, you've just wasted so much time because you've been stubborn instead of, like you say, taking a break and or
Yeah.
talking to people as well,
Yeah.
just talking. I think in my experience, like especially when I started, I don't think I asked enough questions, and I just
Mm,
wanted to like, I guess I was just worried about proving myself, or
yeah.
for me anyway, tech design is it can sometimes seem like you're a hindrance because you're asking questions, making sure you have a full understanding of like what the designer needs and what the programmers feel are able to do with the systems that they have available to them, and blah blah blah. So there's like a lot of talking involved, and maybe other disciplines are needed, so you talk to them as well. And I think at the beginning it can be a lot of internal pressure where you're like, oh no, I haven't even started implementing anything yet. I've just been talking to people. I'm wasting time. But actually, that time's never wasted because you end up saving a whole lot of time because you get so many questions out of the way first. And a lot of the time, like, I'd talk to, especially a designer, they'll like give you a design brief or whatever, say like, make me this thing. And you're like,
Yeah.
okay. And then you go away and you look at it, you talk to the programmers, whatever. You come back and you're like, actually, what are the specifics for X, Y, and Z? And they go, haven't really thought about that. And you're like, okay, I'm just going to need another like couple hours to figure out how I can allow you the tools you need to be able to like figure that out and through trial and error, which is what a lot of designers need to do anyway. But yeah, it's what it comes back to what you said earlier, really, isn't it? Like to not just make exactly what's been asked of you, but to instead put the time into it to ensure that time's not wasted in the future and you can get the most out of it. But yeah.
Yeah.
What are some skills that are needed to be a technical designer, in your opinion?
Skills to be a technical designer. Being a technical designer, I think, is mostly about knowing how things are made. And you kind of already covered it as like, I don't know if this is a skill, but maybe the biggest skill is having a curiosity and willingness to jump into something that you don't know. On a more technical level, I think it's important to have an understanding of how to realize an idea. Again, that's really broad, but depending on what engine you're using or what tools you're using, it's having a knowledge and ability to essentially sketch a design. So like in Unreal, that's the engine that I use primarily for work, or have used primarily for work rather. Blueprints is the way to kind of like test out ideas very very quickly, right? So familiarity with the engine and with scripting language is, I think, a big help.
Yeah.
Sorry, does that answer the question? I feel
Yeah.
like it's pretty ambiguous.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's a tough one to answer. It's a tough one, but I'm going to dig down into it now because the next question is, do you need to code to be a technical designer?
When you say do you need to code, I'm guessing you mean like do you need to know like C++ or any kind of
I
coding
mean,
language or?
yeah, so coding language, yeah, because I don't know C++, but I did do C sharp.
Yeah,
Yeah, like would you say you need programming languages? Like, would you need to know them?
that's a tough one.
It is.
Um, I personally, I mean, again, I'm coming from a place of privilege that I already know how to code, so maybe expect that I have some bias. But I I think Blueprint in Unreal is coding. It's literally the same thing, just a different wrapper.
Just visual, yeah.
Um, yeah, scripting is coding. You know, writing in C++ or C sharp is all coding. I think it's better to think of it as just different ways to give instructions
Yeah,
to
yeah.
to the machine. I really think there are languages that are really complicated because they're used for very specific things. Like C++ is still used to this day across the industry, like overwhelmingly, and it's complicated because it serves a really specific purpose because it allows you to micromanage memory, and that's really important for making things performant. But you can make a game without ever touching C++, right? Like
Yeah.
C sharp is, I think, technically considered a scripting language. Or like I use Godot for my personal projects, and they have their own scripting language as well. And I have not touched C++ in any of my personal projects.
Oh, interesting.
So yeah, I think a lot of people get really intimidated by coding, and I think it's kind of like this very intimidating thing because the learning curve for certain languages is quite steep. Like C++ especially. Like, please nobody start with C++. Um, I mean, like for other languages, it's kind of steep too, but I think it's really rewarding. And if you think about it as more of how to give instructions to get your result,
Yeah.
I think it becomes more accessible. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, that's like it's the biggest question I get when people find out that I'm a tech designer. They're like, "Do you need to code for that?" And I'm like, kinda, yeah, but also no, because you're not a programmer. So like you have
Yeah.
programmers. So
Yeah.
yeah.
It helps to be able to like read it and reason it. Like you said, being able to see
Yeah.
or look at the code, even if you can't write it, to be able to read it, I think is very helpful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and for you and a programmer to have a discussion about
Right.
is this what you need, and if you don't know what a boolean is or whatever, then you have
Yeah.
to. I mean, you can still ask them, and I'm sure they'd be happy to like sit down and talk to you. It's just it takes longer. You're not on the same wavelength.
Yeah. Exactly.
But yeah. And then the next question: do you need to be good at mathematics to be a tech designer?
I think it totally depends. It totally depends on what you're working on. Um,
True.
yeah, if you're working on like locomotion and physics and like making a character run around and jump and shoot projectiles that arc and stuff, it really helps to have a decent like trigonometry understanding and like vector math. I know it sounds like super intimidating, but I promise it's not. Versus if you're working on something that's more state-based, you probably don't have to. You just kind of have to understand the transitions between states. So I don't know. It's difficult to say like what you need and what you don't
Yeah.
for any kind of discipline, tech design especially, because it's so versatile and you could be working on so many different things. What I would say is every bit helps.
Yeah.
Knowing something only makes your life easier and your work better.
Yeah, absolutely. I always just say to people, I've always struggled with maths. I hated math class, and I tried my hardest to get C in GCSE, but it's never held me back in technology. And I think that might be because, I don't know, like I was always good at algebra. And I always see game dev as being quite similar because it's usually you're just figuring out like vectors, like that makes sense because it's visual, especially I'm working in a game engine, so it's all visual, very different to just like doing multiplication on a paper in front of you. I don't know. It's just never really held me back as much as I thought it would have done when I first got into the tech industry. But yeah, and good point. Yeah, if you're working just with like state machines and transitions and stuff, that's more to do with logic, which is the next question. What is design logic?
Wow, almost like we scripted this. I promise it's not the case. You know what? When you brought up these questions, you asked what is design logic, and I was like, I've never heard that term before, and I don't know what that is, and to this day I still don't understand. I don't know what is meant by design logic. So I don't know. Can you give me more context on what?
Yeah.
What's the question?
What's the question? So
Please rephrase.
Yeah, so this is actually a question that I got asked before in a Q&A, and I thought I'd ask you to see what your answer would be. And they said, what's the difference between maths and logic? And I was like, oh, that's such a good question.
Okay.
So in my opinion, design logic is the logic of like a design flow. It's everything we've been talking about. It's logic of how a thing's going to be put together. Like that is all logic. So it's like, I want to make this door and it's got to open and close. But then the design logic of that is like, okay, we need an interaction system. Like, is it going to be a press or a hold? Does the door open by swinging? If it does, which way is it swinging? All of these things, like that is all the design logic. And then state machines, it's all design logic. It's like we start in a closed state. What transition do we need to then transition? What rules do we need to transition to an open state? It's all logic. Yeah. So it's not mathematical. It's just logic. Yeah, so that's how I've always seen it. Maybe you have a different word for it, but yeah.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, or maybe because I haven't had any like formal design training, I just didn't even think about it. It's I think like if you can make a flow chart of how something behaves, I guess that's design logic then, right? By your definition.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, absolutely. And this is so important. Like I'd say this is like number one for every designer. It's like having that logical brain that always wants to pick apart how and why and what is the logic and how do we get from A to B, going through all stages. Yeah
That's a big one. That's a really important thing, and that's also like a great opportunity to like what you described earlier of like if you show somebody the flow chart of like, okay, this is how I want this object, this door to behave, and then you take that as a designer, you take that to a technical designer or to a programmer, and they'll be like, what about this case, or like what about that case, and you're like, oh yeah, I didn't think of that, let me go back and like refine it, and you ultimately end up with a better working thing.
Exactly.
So I guess cool. Well, I mean, you answered the question. Sorry, I didn't contribute much.
You knew it.
I guess. Yeah, I just never thought about it that way.
Yeah. I mean, the writer did say in the chat that an expert not being familiar with the terminology is very comforting. And that's just how it is, like you say, we've all come from different backgrounds, and maybe this word is more of like an English thing, an English term than an American. I don't know.
Maybe.
But yeah. It's all good. You don't need to know the exact words to be able to get into the industry or whatever. Especially design. Yeah. There's a lot of design jargon, however you say
it. I like jargon.
Jargon.
Very Swedish. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So we'll just keep this very broad question. In your day-to-day, what aspects of game development are you responsible for within a tech design role?
Yeah, it's it varies quite a bit day to day. I think that kind of comes with the fact that tech design isn't super strictly kind of like railroaded. All the stuff that we've been talking about so far has been very, very broad, and not, yeah, not super strict, not super strictly delineated. Um, so it ends up being the case that some days are just like um, reactive work, like build is failing and nobody knows why. So let's help debug while people are still working on some other elements. Um, Other times, I've had more design responsibilities where I was leading a group of multidiscipline devs to get a feature in. So, you know, I'd come up with the design, do a kickoff meeting to kind of align with the animators, sound, VFX, programmers, etc. And over the course of the like week or two, to, like check in with those and see like, okay, where can I plug the holes, or what connection needs to be made, and that's kind of the role of a technical designer, but also like of a design, I don't know, leader for the group. I don't know, that sounds very like design leader, but and then other days are very kind of like toward the opposite end of the spectrum of like, okay, let's check the work, check the things that have gone in over the last day to make sure that they're up to standard, that people aren't using any components that are broken or that are costing us a lot of memory or something like that. So I think it's really difficult to define or to say exactly what the day-to-day for a technical designer is, because the role is so so versatile and so in a lot of cases kind of reactive. It's really about I don't really like the phrase, but it's about like plugging the holes in the ship where something is getting missed.
Yeah.
I don't know, like what would you say like your day to day as a technical designer has been?
Yeah, it's very, very different. Like, I think a lot of it is you have to just take your own initiative a lot of the time. Like, there will be some times where you're in the throes of a feature or something and you're like, working with other people. But one thing I didn't realize about becoming a tech designer until I became a tech designer is the amount of talking that you will do. I know we used to talk about this a lot. It doesn't seem like the type of role that would be extremely sociable, but it actually is. And there's a lot of times where you don't get to do a lot of technical implementation work because you're actually spending a lot of time just like on random calls with like other disciplines and also QA a lot. I think I fell into, because I'd had my hands in a lot of different pockets of things over the years. I was kind of the go-to person for a lot of questions about many different systems, which was fine. But then it can get hard to manage, like actually getting work done versus helping people and pointing them in the right direction. Which also, I will say, documentation was like a massive part of my role, and maybe same for you. I was always trying to do documentation so that I could kind of offload that. So if people came to me with questions, I could go, here, documentation, and that really helps. And I find there's a lot of crossover between tech design and tech writers. From what I've heard, I've like spoken to a couple tech writers and I'm like, that sounds familiar, understanding, having like the technical knowledge and being able to put that down on paper in terms that maybe not as techie people will understand as well. That's another part of tech design.
That's a really good point. I feel honestly kind of like remiss for not having mentioned the documentation bit.
It's big.
It's huge. It's big, and I didn't even think of it because well, first of all, it's not my strong suit. I'm not drawn toward documentation.
All right, the next question, it dips back into, I think I said a while ago that we, as tech designers, are kind of like generalists. We know many different things, but usually it's like we know a little bit about many different things, and then we might specialize into something more, but you know.
Yeah.
So how do you keep up to date with game dev in general?
With game dev in general,
Yeah.
I watch a lot of YouTube videos. I watch a lot of YouTube videos of like uh, uh, people like reviewing games. Honestly, because that's a great insight into what's fun and what's not, and what works and what doesn't.
Yeah.
And it's nice to have kind of I definitely it's easy to get into a bubble of like, yeah, people review the things that I like, so you kind of follow them more. But also, GDC, Game Developers Conference, puts out tons of videos on YouTube, and they're, for the most part, all really interesting, or I find them really interesting. Um, I really like watching the design ones, of course, and again, similar to what I said earlier, is like even design for games that I've never played and maybe won't play, because it's fascinating to hear other people describe the problems that they had and how they went about solving them. And I think that's really kind of like the skill that or is needed to develop. Is like it's all problem solving things, and the more experience you have solving problems, even if somebody else have solved that problem, you get to implement that in your own things. Unreal Engine is constantly being updated. Tons of new things come out all the time.
All the
And it's,
time.
yeah, right. Like I don't know if you read the latest patch notes, but there's just like tons and tons of
So
stuff.
you can do like
Um,
motion graphics. Like you
yeah,
don't even need to use After Effects anymore. I'm like, what?
I
Yeah,
know,
need to learn all
and,
this
and that's
stuff.
so cool. And that's so cool. Now follow a tutorial and just like make something with that system, and that's like
Yeah.
I think that's the best way, is getting your hands on it and doing stuff with it, and also exposing yourself to as much information as possible. Play tons of games, watch tons of videos, get other people's opinions
Yes.
on the yeah.
So I love that you say play tons of games, because I hear too much that like game devs are like, oh, I'm not allowed to play games anymore because I have to spend all my time making games. And I'm like, where do you get your like creative inspiration from, you know?
Uh-huh.
Or like you said, like exploring games that maybe you wouldn't normally play. That's where you get like cool different ideas, because
Yeah.
you're taking ideas from different things, and seeing like, oh, what if I took this element from this genre I don't really like because I don't like the rest of it, but I like
Right.
this one gameplay loop or like whatever, and then what if I put that into an environment that I personally enjoy, and then you've made something completely unique. But yes, I love that you say play, because I am too. Like sometimes I do feel guilty, and I'm like, I'm playing a game, I could be making a game, but then I try and remind myself like, no, I'm a gamer at heart. That's why I do this anyway. So this is important as well. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's really important.
Yeah. Good point. Good point. And what is the most challenging and the most rewarding part of being a technical designer?
Okay. For me, the most challenging is documentation. We've already covered that a little bit. Um, yeah, that's a good question. I think it varies person to person. Obviously, like depending on the temperament, again because it's so broad. Um, I think for again, and depending on the nature of the work, for people that really want to be able to point to something in game and be like, hey, look, I did that, um, or I made that. It might not, tech design might not always be the right thing. It could be, but it might not be. I think you will find a lot more thanks from your colleagues than from the players in terms of the work that you do. However, on the flip side, if you're the kind of technical designer that does have their fingers in all the pots and that's very close to the player experience, that might not be the case. You might actually be able to point to something in game and be like, hey, I did that. I'm fortunate enough that I do have like some of those kind of things, and that makes me feel really good. For me, that's a source of validation, if that I can go to my family and friends who aren't in the games industry and be like, dude, check this out, look at this cool thing. So I think that can be a challenge. But in terms of what's most rewarding, I think if the tech designer has a predilection for smoothing out processes and making things flow, both in terms of like the communication as well as the like fluidity, facilitating the fluidity of the game coming together. I think tech design can be a very rewarding position from that perspective. Is seeing things move well rather than just seeing the end result of something.
Yeah.
More about the process than the destination, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I completely. Like the satisfaction of seeing how the thing is made and feeling proud of that than just, we got to the end result, because there's many different ways to get to the end result, and some ways could probably be done in 5 minutes and some ways can be done in 5 days, but the difference in that, if that's what feeds you and brings you satisfaction, then
I think outside of just technical design, I think it's really important to love the process.
Yeah.
Because if you only love the end result, you're in for a lot of disappointment. Games get canceled all the time. They take years to make. Sometimes they take years to make, and then they get canceled. So you really have to, I think, yeah, I know. We were in that same boat, right? So I think in order to thrive, not only as a technical designer, but as a game developer, I think you really have to enjoy the act of making rather than the act of having made, or sorry, the state of having made.
And enjoying the small wins and playing games and getting away from the computer is all part of it. Absolutely.
Yes. Oh my God, please don't, anybody who's hearing us talk, just think that you have to play games 24/7. Please touch grass.
Touch grass.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so this is the last question before we go on into our Q&A section. So don't worry, chat. We will be looking at questions. And if you have written a question, please pop it back into the chat now so I can find them nice and easy. But the last question for you is, what are your career goals for the future? I want to know, like, is this it? You want to be like maybe a principal lead technical designer, or do you have further aspirations? What do you think?
Yeah. Yes, I have very, very high, lofty aspirations. Oh, I've always wanted to be a creative director or game director. So that's what I'm aiming for. That's still a long ways off. But yeah, I want to be. How do I put it? I want to make the things that I want to make. I think a lot of people have the kind of like fantasies of like their dream games and all that kind of stuff. And I think in order to be a successful creative director and game developer, it's not just about what you want to make, but about the act of refining some vague idea into something, I don't know, not to sound like too whatever, but like refining it into something magical and something really cool. Again, it's about the process of the refinement and making something that people will enjoy, and that's what I really want to be responsible for. And to me, I think that's where I think, as far as I can tell, that's what a creative director does. So that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
But that being said, I also really like implementing things. And I think a creative director doesn't often get the chance to do that. So we'll see. Maybe I'll be a creative director of a studio of one, just indie dev one day.
Indie dev.
Yeah, indie life.
Yeah.
So So yeah.
Yeah, I think
What about you?
you'd make a good creative director, especially because you've got like hands-on knowledge, you've got the technical understanding, you like to do the implementation. I guess, yeah, probably the hard part for you will just be like taking steps away and be like, okay, I'll let you
Oh,
handle it.
I know. I have 100% belief that I'll be an auteur and be like, no, absolutely, make that blue. And yeah, I'd be terrible to work for,
One
but I'll get
pixel
over it.
too large.
Yeah,
Oh my
exactly.
gosh. Yeah. For me, I mean, dude, I don't know. Ever since the layoffs, like, I've been so confused. Before the layoffs, I was totally like, narrative design, that's my jam. Or
Hmm.
narrative technical design, because I also love the implementation, but I love like narrative, and I just definitely want to work on something that's more of a narrative focused game. I'd love to
Yeah.
work on like a branching narrative game. And now I'm just like, I don't even know. And I've started doing these interviews and playing lots of indie games, and I'm like, indie games seem fun, but then like, where's the money in that? I don't know. If you could just leave us with one top tip for anyone who's looking to become a technical designer, what would that be?
One top tip for anyone who's looking to become a technical designer. I hope this isn't a cop out, because I think this tip is applicable just kind of like in general, not only just for technical design,
That's
but
fine.
maybe especially for technical design, is um, just be curious, like all the time about everything. Take inspiration from any other things you enjoy um, outside of game development, um, and try to find learnings and ways to apply that in your game development journey. Um, yeah, there's lots of opportunities for learning everywhere, and the more you learn, the better you'll do, especially as a technical designer, um, in a very versatile and like in a good way ambiguous role. So yeah, I think that's kind of my summation.
Yeah, I think that's a good top tip. Very good one. And like you said, you've kind of had that mindset ever since you were young, and that's helped you get to where you are today. So yeah, and I think in the games industry as a whole, you need to have that mindset, because it's always progressing. It's just always going like
Yeah.
this. And you never feel like you're on top of it, because there's always more to learn. So yeah.
No. Yeah, and I think you have to not be scared of feeling that you're not on top of it
Yeah.
either, because
Yeah.
it's ultimately kind of a group effort. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, I think that's it, because we've kept you for 2 hours. So
Oh man,
thank you
time
so
went by so
much.
fast. I didn't even notice.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you spending time with us and sharing all your tidbits of knowledge and wisdom over your almost decade-long journey in the games industry. Yeah, I appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. It was a blast. I hope
Yeah,
that the information was helpful. People enjoyed it.
definitely. It absolutely was.
Yeah. Have a great evening. And yeah, thanks again for having me.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Chat
Okay.
to you in a bit. All right, so that was Leo, and yeah, so much wisdom, so much knowledge, and it's just so nice to chat with another technical designer and to share that with you, because tech design is weird. Like it's the same kind of principles, but we'll have different approaches, and different studios will need different things, and that's why I am currently preparing to teach a tech design course with Intergames next month, and it's like it's been a bit mind-boggling, but I think I'm getting there. It's really just about the way that you approach things, and yeah, and how you look out for pain points, and how you can support those around you, and think about them while you're developing systems and mechanics. So cool. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a lovely day or evening. Goodbye. Thanks for watching. Thanks so much to my Patreons: October Night Games, Bruce Barrett, Salvatore Merrifield, Sherman Jackson, Dave Smith, Stuart Terry, Ib196, Quinn Darko, DC Bradshaw, and everybody else. I really appreciate your support.